In the last few months, I've been covering a few of the older Nintendo games, and it would be a huge miss if I did not cover one of the most influential games of all time, the original Super Smash Bros. On the N64. For myself, it was a real childhood-defining game that I played constantly with my friends and family, and to this day is one of the few games from my early years that I still actively play in its modern iterations. For Nintendo, it remains one of the most popular and important gaming franchises. It has since spawned 4 sequels throughout the years, the most recent being Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, as well as an esports scene that has seen its own ups and downs throughout the years. The latest title, Ultimate, features a whopping total of 70 plus characters and 900 plus soundtracks. But despite its massive growth and following nowadays, the series came from very humble beginnings. So let's now take an in-depth look back at the game that started it all, the original Super Smash Bros. On the N64. In the late 1990s, Nintendo was working on many games concurrently, and already established itself as a successful gaming company with multiple franchises, each with their own iconic characters. A secondary developer for Nintendo, HAL Laboratory, also known for its Pokemon Snap, Pokemon Stadium, and Kirby games, was responsible for the development of Super Smash Bros. Masahiro Sakurai was playing around the idea of a fighting game while working at HAL, and created an unreleased prototype under the name of Dragon King, the fighting game. He took this to another co-worker, the now legendary Satoru Iwata, and together with one other employee, the 3-man team started development work. It's pretty mind-blowing to consider developing a game with such a small team nowadays, especially since Iwata and Sakurai both also worked on other major projects at the time as well. The two leads knew that most fighting games didn't sell very well, so they decided to make their title stand out by including other major Nintendo characters. This posed a problem though. They needed permission from Nintendo to use these characters in their game. You can only imagine what a difficult game pitch it was to Miyamoto, the head boss of Nintendo at the time. Reports here differ, but there was definitely resistance from Nintendo to allow their characters to fight each other in the game, which is understandable since it seems like a lose-lose situation. Despite the initial refusal and reservations, Iwata had Sakurai proceed ahead with a prototype anyway, and this version was impressive enough to convince the heads at Nintendo to allow their characters to be used in the official game. Turns out, the design and vibe of the game did not pit the Nintendo characters against each other in a negative way, and would end up being beneficial for the company as a whole. Popular characters would bring in a core base of players, and also introduce them to characters from other Nintendo games. And this was on top of the new IP driving incremental sales for Nintendo, producing a nice halo effect for the company. Super Smash Bros. Was officially released in early 1999 for Japan, and later that year for the rest of the world. It opened to solid reviews and sales, and to date has sold approximately 5 million copies. The success of this single game would also lead to the aforementioned sequels, which would all also go on to do well. A key part of the original Super Smash Bros. Success stems from Nintendo's philosophy of game design. It's simple and easy to pick up for casual gamers, with extensive room and subtleties to be mastered by more serious players. This design philosophy was really well executed for this game. I remember being able to pick up the controller and intuitively play with little to no instructions. I was probably around 7 to 8 years old at the time, and I remember the rush of the first few matches I played with my friends. Ironically though, when I recently played the game up again for this video, the controls felt clunky due to the years of playing newer Smash games and using modern controllers. For some reason I thought it would be easy for me to jump back into the game given my extensive experience now with the series. I found myself trying to use moves that didn't exist in the original, so I was constantly button mashing. For example, the side B attacks didn't exist until Melee, and charge smash attacks weren't anything yet either. It was a pretty awkward experience playing this game again, and I can't say I did ever get used to the controls. I also noticed the game's registering of attacks was slow, and characters didn't feel nearly as responsive as I thought they would. It's always interesting to revisit something after such a long time, since you remember things completely differently than reality. I will say though, more passive elements such as the opening sequence, the announcer's voice, and background music did bring back memories of old, and were just as I remember them. The vision of bringing the various Nintendo franchises together did manifest itself successfully, and the game featured a total of 12 playable characters. It's notable to call out that other characters like Marth and Bowser were considered for the game, but scrapped during development, but they would appear in later sequels. The 8 characters that are unlocked by default are Mario, Donkey Kong, Link, Samus, Yoshi, Kirby, Fox, and Pikachu. There are 4 additional characters that can also be unlocked by completing certain tasks in game. These are Luigi, Captain Falcon, Ness, and Jigglypuff. I think 12 is a good cast of characters, considering when the game was released, and also the limitations with the N64 hardware. Each character was unique, and I appreciated the special movesets that were carried over from their own respective franchises. For example, Kirby can suck in opponents and steal their powers, Samus can fire charge shots, and Fox can fire lasers. My personal favorite character was, and still is, Pikachu, mostly because I was going through a Pokemon phase at that age. Obviously, I was terrible when I first started and would just spam the B button at a distance, which is not a good strategy. Over time, I learned to pick up other characters as well and to engage more directly in combat. At the time of the game's release, this roster of characters represented the who's who of Nintendo games. Some of the lesser known characters like Ness and Captain Falcon definitely received more exposure as the game brought in fans from the more popular series like Mario, Pokemon, and Zelda. It's a concept that has continued to this day, as subsequent games will include more and more characters throughout the years, but the original really helped establish this core idea. Now let's take a look at the different gameplay types in game. At its core, Super Smash Bros. Is a classic brawler/fighter game. This makes the versus mode the primary game type that people play and talk about. In this mode, up to 4 players, human and or NPCs, can battle it out on the same screen. The goal is to knock opponents off the stage. As characters take damage, a percentage counter increases, and the higher it is, the easier it is for the character to be sent flying. There are 2 variants here, stock and timed. In stock, the objective is to be the last man standing and knocking opponents out by depleting their stock to 0. Most of the time you will see 3 to 5 stocks for each player. In timed, everyone has unlimited lives, and you try and score as many KOs of opponents as possible, and the person with the highest number wins. From what I've seen, the majority of casual and competitive players play the stock mode, since kill stealing in timed allows for far too much cheese and RNG when there are more than 2 players. I personally always preferred free-for-all games with 4 people, since it keeps things interesting. The best player doesn't always win, given how chaotic these games could be, which I liked. But also for social reasons, the more people there were, the more enjoyable I found the game. Even if you were down a person, you can even add in a challenging NPC. Difficult here is measured by levels to play alongside the group. Level 9 makes a good challenge for human players. We will also sometimes set up our own 1v1 LAN tournaments for a true test of skill. There's an added element of competition here, and you can also watch other people play and plan your strategy accordingly as you make your way through the top. It is worth mentioning that the 1v1 in this game is notoriously broken, something we will get into later in the video. A major element of the game is also the items. Periodically, random items will fall onto each of the stages. They can be picked up by any player and used to inflict damage, enhance standard attacks, heal damage, and have a wide variety of effects and mechanics. Many of these items are also from the same franchises the characters come from, for example shells from Mario and Pokeballs from Pokemon. You can also create modified game modes in versus by manipulating the items and how often they show up. Pokeballs are by far my favorite item, since you never know which Pokemon will come out and there's always a surprising variety. I frequently would play battles with this as the only item turned on. These tended to devolve into everyone just running around and throwing Pokeballs at each other and seeing what comes out. Especially for casual play, items introduce a nice variety of possibilities, and you can really help close the gap between players of different skill levels. This is a feature in game that has been constantly expanded upon in sequels, and is definitely a welcome addition. It is worth noting also that the item switch option is something that has to be unlocked by playing 100 versus mode games in this title. This will allow players to turn on and off certain items and also set the frequency of which they appear, which is obviously an important feature for anyone who has played a Super Smash game. Sequels will technically have this option already available by default. This particular requirement seems a little bit excessive to me personally, since 100 games is obviously a lot, and having to grind this out for repeat players can really ruin the ability to customize the games if you were to say pick up a new copy of the title. So let's summarize quickly here. Everything we just went through are the positive aspects for this title. The combination of a solid cast of characters across key franchises, unique movesets and strategies, a strong versus mode, and variety of items made for a very solid and revolutionary fighting game at the time of its release. Now we're going to be taking a look at the aspects of the game that were controversial among the community or are the weaker elements for me personally. Let's start with the stage design. Although the community here has a mixed stance on the stages in this game, I maintain its variety and concepts are great, especially considering when the game came out. There's a decent selection, and each one has its own strategies and mechanics to be used for your advantage. The main issue most people have here appears to be the RNG factor that makes competitive play difficult. So the main break here is that stages can be good for casual play, but there isn't a fair or viable selection for competitive. So it really depends on your personal POV if you like the stages in this game or not. Another aspect that was criticized was the single player mode, which most people found to be somewhat lacking. I personally had mixed feelings about the single player mode. I enjoyed the concept, each stage got progressively more difficult, and there were some unique enemies and a good final boss. I also give the developers here some wiggle room, given the style of the game. Having a stellar single player game isn't really a realistic expectation. It's a fighting game that was designed to be played socially, so the single player mode isn't where the focus should be. I will say the replay value of the single player mode is pretty limited, and my major gripe was being forced to play through the mode to unlock some of the characters. So if you had a group of people playing, only one person can play at a time to grind out the unlocks. Another option for solo play is the target practice mode. As a side game type, you can figure out how to use the best character abilities to hit all the targets and reduce the time. I personally didn't find this to be an enjoyable game type, but you can see how a lot of people will be dedicated to bringing down the record times. The game pretty much isn't really worth playing solo once you have gone through the single player mode once or twice, but once again, I kind of expected this and appreciate that there was some content here to be explored. Perhaps the most valid criticism of the game, which was hinted at earlier, is an issue that still exists to this day, and this issue is balance. As many of you might already know, this is a problem that plagues all competitive titles. I'm actually not aware of any game worth playing competitively where balance is not an ongoing issue. Anyone who has played Super Smash for even a moderate amount of time will notice that the uniqueness of the individual characters lead to this fatal flaw, since having all the different movesets makes it difficult to balance for the developers. Pikachu is a notable powerhouse in this title, and has an edge mechanically over the entire roster. Kirby is also considered a top tier character due to being able to lock people up into stun locks and possessing great recovery. I can completely understand and agree with the criticism here, and at top levels where people play competitively, this really reduced the number of viable characters that people can choose. This unfortunately also leads to a lack of variety during top tier competitions, making matchups somewhat boring and repetitive. Even for your average player, the impact of balance can be noticeable. Lower tier characters like Luigi, Link, or Donkey Kong can still be effective when casual players are playing, but there's definitely a disadvantage playing these characters due to slower movement speed or a lack of synergy in movesets. The good thing is for casual play is that the use of items and different stages can really help balance things out by introducing RNG elements, but these are typically restricted in competitive play. Balancing issues have continued to occur in the series. One can even argue that the original Super Smash Bros. Is the most balanced game in the series due to a smaller cast of characters and available movesets. Notoriously broken characters in the sequels like Meta Knight and Bayonetta will significantly change the landscape for the series. Besides the single player options and balancing issues though, Super Smash Bros. And the N64 is one of those iconic games that had such a large impact on gaming in general. All these years later, it might still get lost in the conversation due to the scale of its sequels, so it's always good to take some time and take a look back at the game that started it all for such an iconic series. In my opinion, modern titles also focus a bit too much on multiplayer gameplay online. Having everyone in a room together for a classic brawler is an excellent change of pace. For those of you who still have your N64s, I would encourage you to break out your own controllers, have some friends over, and play this original title and take a trip down memory lane. So that is it for this video. If you like this content, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons below. You can also follow us on social media and leave a comment below with your thoughts. As always, thank you very much for your time, and see you all again real soon.